buzzed with wealth and ambition. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the crowd, but Amara Sinclair wasn't here to admire the decor. She stood at the edge of the room, champagne in hand, her sleek black gown a statement of power. The painting, a rare masterpiece, was her target. Securing it would cement her reputation as the youngest curator at the Bellamy Gallery. "Impressive, isn't it?" A deep, velvety voice murmured behind her. She turned to find a man who looked like trouble wrapped in a tailored suit. Dark hair, sharp jawline, and a smirk that could melt steel. "Depends on your definition of impressive," she replied coolly. "Lorenzo Devereaux," he said, extending a hand. "Amara Sinclair," she replied, shaking it firmly. "Ah, the infamous curator who always gets what she wants," he teased. "And you're the billionaire who buys art to match his furniture?" She shot back. His laugh was low and rich. "Touche. Let's see if you can outbid me tonight." As the auctioneer began, their eyes locked, a silent challenge. The numbers climbed higher, and so did the tension. 2 million, Lorenzo said smoothly. 2.5, Amara countered, her voice steady. 3, he replied, leaning back as if this were a game of poker. 3.5, she said, her heart racing. 4 million, he said, his smirk widening. Amara hesitated. She couldn't let him win. 4.5. 5 million, Lorenzo said, his tone final. The gavel slammed down. Sold to Mr. Devereaux. Amara's stomach twisted, but she refused to show defeat. As Lorenzo approached, she crossed her arms. "Congratulations," she said icily. "Don't look so disappointed," he said, his voice low. "I might be willing to share for a price." "I don't make deals with devils," she replied, her tone sharp. "Then you're missing out," he said, his smirk deepening. Later that evening, Amara found herself cornered in a dimly lit lounge. Lorenzo handed her a glass of wine, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You didn't come here to gloat, did you?" she asked. "Not entirely," he said, leaning closer. "I have a proposition." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I'll loan the painting to your gallery for 6 months, he said smoothly. "And what do you want in return?" "A date," he said simply. Amara blinked. "You spent $5 million for a date?" He shrugged. "I like a challenge." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable." "And you're irresistible," he countered, his voice dropping to a whisper. For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. "Fine," she said. "1 date, but don't think for a second that you've won." Lorenzo's grin was pure devil. "Oh, Amara, the game's just getting started." Their date was anything but ordinary. Lorenzo whisked her away to a private rooftop dinner overlooking the city skyline. The table was set with candles and a string quartet played softly in the background. "Subtle," Amara said, taking in the extravagant setup. "I don't do subtle," Lorenzo replied, pulling out her chair. As the night unfolded, their banter was sharp and playful. "So, tell me," Lorenzo said, swirling his wine, "what drives a woman like you?" "Ambition," she said without hesitation. "And you?" "Desire," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. The intensity in his eyes made her breath hitch, but she quickly recovered. "Desire for what? Power? Money?" "None of the above," he said, leaning closer. "Right now my desire is entirely focused on you." Amara's cheeks flushed, but she refused to let him see her falter. "You're awfully confident for someone who just lost the upper hand." "Did I?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Before she could respond, he reached across the table, brushing his fingers against hers. The touch was electric, sending a jolt of heat through her. As the evening came to an end, Lorenzo walked her to her car. "This was unexpected," Amara admitted. "Good," he said, stepping closer. "I like keeping you on your toes." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." "And you're irresistible," he said again, his voice a whisper. Before she could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was slow, deliberate, and utterly intoxicating. When they finally pulled apart, Amara's head was spinning. "Good night, Amara," Lorenzo said, his smirk returning. As he walked away, she realized something. She wasn't just playing his game, she was rewriting the rules. The next morning, Amara arrived at her gallery to find a package waiting for her. Inside was a note written in Lorenzo's elegant handwriting. "The painting is yours, for now, but don't think I've forgotten our deal. See you soon." Amara smirked, folding the note carefully. He thought he had the upper hand, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. Later that evening, she sent him a text. "Dinner, my terms, don't be late." A week later, Amara found herself standing in Lorenzo's penthouse, a glass of champagne in hand. The city skyline stretched out before her, glittering like a sea of stars. Lorenzo stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, his voice low and smooth. "I've been thinking," she replied, turning to face him. "About what?" "About you," she said, her tone unreadable, "and about why a man like you would spend $5 million on a painting you didn't even want." Lorenzo's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but he quickly recovered. "I told you, I like a challenge." "Do you?" she asked, stepping closer. "Or was it something else?" He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you getting at, Amara?" She set her glass down on the table, her movements deliberate. "I did some digging. Turns out the painting wasn't just a rare masterpiece. It was also the key to unlocking a very lucrative inheritance tied to your family's estate." Lorenzo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "You didn't buy that painting to impress me," she continued, her voice sharp now. "You bought it because you needed it, and you used me as a convenient excuse to justify the purchase." "Amara," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't," she said, her eyes blazing. "You played me, Lorenzo, and I don't take kindly to being played." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Lorenzo let out a low sigh. A month later, Amara stood in her gallery, watching as visitors admired the painting that had caused so much chaos. It was the centerpiece of her latest exhibit, and the buzz around it had brought in record-breaking crowds. She had won the painting back in a private deal with the auction house, using a loophole Lorenzo hadn't anticipated. It had cost her nearly everything, but it was worth it. As she sipped her champagne, a courier approached her with a small package. "Miss Sinclair, this just arrived for you," he said, handing it over. She opened it carefully, finding a single envelope inside. The note read, "Amara, you were right. I don't deserve you, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove that I'm more than the man you walked away from. Yours, Lorenzo." Beneath the note was a key. Amara's heart skipped a beat as she realized what it was for. She glanced at the painting on the wall, her mind racing. The courier cleared his throat. "There's one more thing, ma'am." He handed her a second envelope, this one containing a legal document. Her eyes widened as she read it. Lorenzo had transferred full ownership of the painting to her, no strings attached. For a moment she stood frozen, the weight of his gesture sinking in. Then, a slow smile spread across her lips. "Game on, Lorenzo," she murmured, tucking the key into her pocket. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.